Namaskara. Good evening to all of you and a very warm welcome to this well-organized evening that our team has put together. This event would not have been possible without possibly the hard work, support that a lot of people did. And I would like to specially mention two people whose insight, vision, and strategic thinking helped actually put all of this together. One is Mr. R. Murthy of the NR Group. He might not like this to be mentioned, but I took the liberty of doing it. And R1 Ramkrishna Mudre. I think the tireless effort that the entire WheeLead team has made all this possible. So I thank you all once again for making this happen. I 3-4 days ago, I returned back after a bout of teaching, and I was keen on possibly, as every speaker would want to, make my mark felt today. And in a bout of inspiration, I sort of typed out a very long and I thought a very forcefully well-written speech. Just the previous day, I was traveling with my colleagues and great friends, Dr. M.A. Balu and Sitaram, who are recent converts to a Mac, and I was talking to them about the benefits of switching over from Windows to Mac. And as fate would have it, my Mac decided to crash the next day. So my speech is gone. And so what little I can remember as having written, I'll try to now recollect and talk and share. And one of my good friends mentioned it is all for the good because possibly I have no choice but to speak from the heart. Well, that speech also was written from the heart. Now, talking about leadership in front of such an august and gathering with so many leaders sitting there, leaders in your own right, leaders who have done so much in your own ways. A leader doesn't really have to mean a person who's done something in a particular field, possibly the corporate world. Every one of us is a leader in our own ways. And speaking to such an enlightened gathering, I think takes a lot of courage or a lot of foolhardiness. And I think I have both today to stand in front of you and possibly share a few thoughts. Now, leadership is a subject actually, I think it's as old as humanity itself. Ever since possibly God made man, Adam had to take a call of leadership and say, I'll eat the apple, without realizing Eve was the actual leader who was getting him to eat the apple. From those days to today, I think it's something which has been discussed, debated, written about in plenty. And what little I'm going to say is possibly going to add to the lot of noise that is out there. It wouldn't surprise you if I say that nearly 25,000 books are written on leadership every year in the United States alone. And if you were to add every other country to it, that churns out thousands of pages of stuff. It's a challenge. It's been, now research shows it's been the subject which has been the most studied, the most written about, but the least known. Now, people talk a lot. Maybe it's just human that we talk a lot about stuff we really don't know much about. And it's paradoxical that I've come to share exactly on the same subject today. There's so much that is written, and there's so little that is actually known. Leadership is something like love. All of us know it exists, it's there. But ask each other to define it, we really don't know how to do it. We have our own ways of defining it, we have our own ways of talking about it. End of the day, we have as many definitions for leadership as there are commentators and writers. Every person wants to write something different. And I can promise you, I've also no different. I have my own ways of interpreting, understanding, and defining leadership. And it's something like what I remember a great art critic, Braque was his name. He writes it so beautifully. He says, the thing about art is that what is most important and what matters is what is least explained about. And I think it's the same thing about leadership. There's so much out there that matters. There's so much out there that's very important to each one of us in our own ways. But surprisingly, many things are hardly explained. Each of us learn, each of us have our own journeys. And so my own journey in leadership actually, in a real sense of understanding it, reflecting on it, teaching about it and writing about it started only 4 years ago. I had the good fortune of actually having a break and going away from my everyday action place, the workplace, and the privilege of possibly learning and being tutored by some of the world's greatest leadership thinkers. Pioneers in their own way, outstanding people, and just interacting, learning from them, being with them, sometimes teaching with them, I started recognizing my own self. And suddenly it struck me that after 25 years of doing what I was doing, somehow life felt empty. It felt very unfulfilled. When I say fulfillment, I would say, in a sense, whenever we do something, we got to do something with all the love that we can generate, with all the care and compassion that we are capable of. And when that is missing, life becomes a burden. And I suddenly realized, after being away from where I was, from the action place, that was what life was for me. It felt in its own way empty, disconnected from myself, from the people around me, from people I had gone to serve, from friends who were working with me, who were colleagues for 20 years. And I felt exhausted. And that year gave me space to possibly sit back, reflect, think, try to understand leadership from a new set of eyes, try to understand myself. And that was the beginning of my own life's journey. And that's what I'm going to write about. And I call that enlightened leadership, the journey of self-transformation. Leadership itself, to me, in my opinion, is an extraordinary journey of spiritual transformation for each one of us. And what I speak today, I think I'll be lying, or it will be possibly just a figment of my imagination if I were to say all that I'm speaking today is everything that's original. It is not. It comes from my experience, it comes from working with people, it comes from learning from great people, reading great books. More importantly, it comes from reflection, self-criticism, introspection, and I think the most important thing is it comes from ancient Indian wisdom. There's so much that when we talk of leadership, we automatically credit the West, maybe because they publish the most. The moment we talk of leadership, what comes in people's mind is Harvard or great institutions like that. Without realizing, possibly we've had in our own backyard extraordinary, from our Upanishads, from the Gita, from ancient writings, and specifically from a lot of Vivekananda. For many, Vivekananda could just be a monk, could be a nationalist, could be a founder of a great institution, could be so many things. But unfortunately, he's hardly been studied and researched as an extraordinary leader. Some of the things that he spoke and wrote about more than 100 years ago, I remember a specific word he uses in one of his writings. He was the first to actually use the word servant leadership, but he's never given the credit for that. In 1970s, Harvard coined that word and they claim credit for that. But actually it was Vivekananda in 1898, for the first time when he wrote to his brother disciples, describing how to lead and how to serve, used the word servant leadership. There's so much that we have. So all this put together with my own little bit of thinking and reflection is what gives me the courage actually to share a few thoughts with all of you. What is so different? How could leadership be actually defined? The intuitive, traditional textbook definitions we have in plenty. There's so much written about. Every 10 years, there's a lot of research on the research on leadership itself. Every 10 years, we have a new concept, a new paradigm, a new theory that is propounded and spoken about, mostly relevant and studied from the eyes of a corporate world. And then you look around, some other researcher comes and thrashes all that and you start all over again. But this has been the history of leadership. Like I said, the more that is written about, the less that we know about it. Let's all take a pause now and look around us. Just look at what kind of a world we have created for ourselves. A world of disharmony, a world of strife, a world of petty jealousies, suspicions, hatred, enormous amount of negative energies that percolate at every stage of work that we do. We don't have to go too far. Just look at India. Look at the kind of our young friend Soni, when she was talking, she introduced that India has got first-class problems and second-class leaders. I'm not even sure we have second-class leaders. Because I'm afraid to even use the word leader. Because I don't believe in leader existing as a noun. There are no leaders. That's my conviction. All that we can as human beings exercise leadership. And there's a huge difference. Leadership is an activity. And so my definition would go like this. Leadership is an activity that we all have to engage in at different points of time. And for what? For mobilizing group and their resources. Whether it is Sudhanova and his company of ExcelSoft, or whether it is all of us in Vivekananda Youth Movement, or it is people in the community itself. All of us all the time are trying to mobilize groups and their resources. And it can't be for our own self. That's the difference that I would like to make. It has to be for something socially constructive. End of the day, we also need to understand we need to work under enormous uncertainty. I don't think any of us can, with absolute certainty, get up and say, I'll reach home safely tonight. We just can't. There's so much of uncertainty around us, and in India we have sort of enjoyed complicating all of it much more. So I think leadership is an activity which is all about mobilizing groups and their resources to do something socially constructive amidst enormous uncertainty. And where does it all begin? I think this journey begins, I would say, in multiple ways. Because look at what we have done to our planet. Look at the confusion that you have created. If all the leaders that this world has trained, we have a business school opening every other day. And if all the MBAs and others that we're creating can be called leaders and can be trained to take on leadership positions, the world shouldn't have been where we are today. If our leaders in the corporate world, if our leaders in the world of politics and governance, if we had leaders in the social world of NGOs and societal improvement, the world must have been a better place. Why would we see so much of problems? Clearly, something has not worked. And what has not worked is we just don't seem to have the leaders to make things work. And so for me, leadership begins with a journey of understanding three very important things. It begins with the journey of understanding ourselves, the self. Very few of us actually stop and pause to ask ourselves some very important and critical questions of who are we? What are we? What are we doing here? What exactly is our role in whatever we are performing? For most Indians, this is not supposed to be a difficult question. Everything that we have been told, whether it is in the domain of Hinduism or Islam or Christianity, is all about understanding the self. But that's an excuse we've been giving ourselves. We actually don't get to do it. I'm not sure how many of us, even in this audience, would actually test their hearts and have the courage to say, well, I'm wrestling with this question of who the hell am I? Who am I? What am I doing here? What is the purpose of my existence? If we can actually begin with these questions, I think the journey of self-transformation has begun. And these are extremely important questions. But if you cannot understand your own self, I am not sure you can understand why you exist. And if you cannot define why you exist, then I think life is empty for you. You really don't have a purpose. I think life's journey in leadership starts with finding a purpose. And not just finding a purpose, articulating that purpose as a clearly understandable vision for yourself and for society. You know, it's a very strange world we live in. A lot of people, I try to teach comparative leadership within India and the US. And if you look at American society, it's very easy to criticize. I have a lot of friends who are very fond of saying, oh, you're from America, and criticize it openly, without understanding, getting into the substance of what Americans are. I'm not defending what they are, but I'm trying to say they live in a culture of self-maximization. For them, they're trained to be that way. It's all about myself and maximizing what I can do for myself in a very productive way. It's all about myself, and there's nothing wrong about it. Actually, the virtues of being selfish. But we live in a fool's world. We fall back on so-called spirituality that ancient India can provide. And if you look at ancient India, it is all about societal maximization. But we are neither societally maximizing stuff, nor are we completely become Americans in self-maximization. We have taken a very confused, hybridized model where we look at self-maximization at everybody else's cost. You know, our children, I can remember whenever our children come home and bring a marks card and say, I've come first in class, apart from the fact that we are happy that our son has done well, we also want to know, in friend ge eshne rank bantu, avlige ಎಷ್ಟು ಬಂತು, ಇವಳಿಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಸಿಕ್ತು ಅಂತ. We are always constantly wanting to know how poorly others have done, or how well we have done in relationship to somebody else. Well, that is not leadership. I think that is pitiably a burden that this country is carrying, and we need to change that. And that's exactly what we mean as building leaders for a resurgent India. We need to go back to what we have, build on what we have. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Build on what we have and go back towards societal maximization. If we could just do that, I think scams like 2G or telecom would all disappear, because we all be looking at society's benefits that we can all maximize. So it all begins with the self. It all begins with understanding ourselves, understanding what we exist for, crafting a vision for ourselves. And it doesn't stop there. We need to go ahead and look at people around us, whether it's our teams, whether it's our employees in a corporate setting, whether it is people working with us as colleagues or partners or whatever you call them, they're others. No man can actually be an island, as the famous saying goes. Whether you like it or not, whether we want or not, we are all driven. And today's research, I keep sharing this in our workshops, leadership is no longer just an art as was described earlier. Today it's become such a science. And it's possibly why very little about it is known is because it doesn't exist in one dimension. Now, leadership is a fascinating combination of so many sciences. I know I grapple with what do we speak in what workshop or what setting. You can bring in behavioral science, you can bring in risk economics into it, you can bring in decision-making sciences and game theory, you can bring in motivation, you can bring in spiritual quotients and all the stuff that we talk about, you can bring in emotions and the psychology of human beings and all their existence. And more importantly today, frontier research, especially at Harvard, shows the neurobiology of leadership is something which is being studied now. We can actually wire ourselves to be extraordinary leaders. That's the current research. And it's a matter of pride that an extraordinary Indian at the University of San Diego is leading this research. We in India always recognize Indians after they get some great award outside. After the Nobel Prize comes, suddenly we remember Chandrasekhar or somebody else. But thankfully, one Indian which Government of India made an exception last year was to give Dr. Ramachandran a Padma Bhushan, even before he got the Nobel Prize. And I'm certain in a couple of years he'll get a Nobel Prize, and part of his work has become the basis of understanding the neurobiology of leadership itself. So it's a huge world out there. And we really need a multidisciplinary team to even understand the different dimensions how leadership all comes together. And applying this science in an artful form takes a lot of vision. And only when people start exploring deep inside themselves can they craft that vision. And so to me, leadership begins with that understanding of that self. And why do that? Is it just about attaining moksha? Well, that's a different, I'm not even going to get into it because I don't have the competence to speak about it. But I think it's all about others, the people around us. Now, inherent in the word lead, all of you tacitly think it's all about a man standing in front with people following us. That means, though I don't subscribe to that view, it means that there are people around us. Whether you like it or not, the moment you say leader, there are people with him. I'm not even sure how many of you even know the meaning of the word lead. I ask this question in a lot of my workshops. How many of you want to be leaders? Pretty much everybody lifts their hand. And after that I ask them, how many of you want to be leader, after I explain what exactly lead means. Now lead comes from an Indo-European root. A lot of words are Indo-European. And it's a fascinating work a lot of researchers have done. They've actually understood it's not just etymology of a word. These words actually communicate a lot more. They don't just communicate meaning, they communicate a deep inherent transfer of emotions and a lot more. And the word lead also communicates it so beautifully. The word lead comes from the Indo-European root called liath, L-E-I-T-H, which actually means to go forth, to let go, and to die. In a sense, it's just about dying. So inherent in the word leadership is actually death, not in a physical sense, but also in a physical sense. Just go back in history and look at all the world's greatest leaders, whether it's beginning from Jesus Christ or our own Krishna. Mahatma Gandhi to President Assad to Abraham Lincoln to John F. Kennedy to our own Indira Gandhi or Rajiv Gandhi. Somewhere, when people try to take on positions of leadership, they might actually be holding on to positions of authority. But fate may trust on leadership on them. And when they actually try to exercise leadership, somehow they get killed too. So somewhere hidden in this word lead, let's not forget, there's a physical sense of getting assassinated, but more physical, there's also a sense of character being assassinated. Let's look at what happened to the anti-corruption movement in India. People try to take on leadership positions, whether it's Anna Hazare or Arvind, and look at the rapidity in which people came down on them like a ton of bricks and assassinated them. They may not be physically assassinating them yet, but they definitely assassinated them in other ways. But more importantly, I would like to go to a deeper transformational meaning of the word let go. Personally I've been wrestling with this concept of letting go. To me, I've always asked myself, I thought I've let go, but in reality I had not. And so that's what gives me the strength and courage to actually write about what I have experienced. You really can't let go so much that you believe in. It's so challenging. Thankfully for me, I've had an extraordinary group of people around me who understand, appreciate, and actually help me walk this journey of letting go. Letting go in a true sense, I think from an Indian perspective, it's very easy to appreciate, is to let go and allow our egos to die. If that can happen, I think we are actually transcending ourselves and continuing a journey of transformational leadership. And that happens only when you learn to interact with others, because our egos actually become problems when you have people around you. When you're alone with yourself, your ego is nobody's problem. It's only your problem. You can live with it for all you care. But when you start interacting with others, so my understanding of enlightened leadership is all about understanding yourself, understanding others around you, and understanding the set of actions that you constantly do or have to do to maintain this relationship with others around you. to me, that is leadership. And in exercising this leadership, it calls for an enormous understanding of a lot of things. I know it's something like a full course that I teach, so it's very difficult for me to sort of narrate everything in 20 minutes. But I must confess that you must take my full workshop to get a more bigger understanding of stuff. But it's all about all these three things. And what do we learn by this? It's an enormous journey. And what I would like to say before I sum up, before somebody informs me about the time, is we need to look at what does enlightened leadership mean to me. Enlightened leadership means a lot of things. Most importantly, it actually means having the courage and the humility to come to terms with the fact that you might not have answers to all problems that you see around you. Now, when we are in leadership positions, people come to us with problems, and the automatic expectation is you'll give them a solution. Now, I think that is a failure of leadership. It is not truly leadership success. You're not adding value. Leadership is not about operating from the zone of our competence. Leadership is all about challenging yourself and operating from the zone of your incompetence. Having the humility to understand that you may not have answers to all questions, having the wisdom to also appreciate that all questions need not be answered even, and also recognizing that you can afford to make yourself vulnerable and allow yourself to be vulnerable. After all, we are humans, and that's exactly how we transcend our own failures and failings and move upwards in this journey of leadership. So I think leadership is all about operating on this dimension of incompetence. Leadership is also, more importantly, learning to operate, it's not only about, it's a constant life of learning. And so I always say this sentence in my own way. I think enlightened leadership is about learning to lead as much as it is about leading to learn. I think many of us, most of us, have so much of courage and confidence that we have in life. We are all experts in everything. You just about ask us anything, we'll simply have an answer to everything. From cricket to cinema to anything, you can ask an Indian, he'll have a solution. And I think somewhere we have forgotten to enjoy the benefit of being in doubt. I think leadership is an extraordinary journey where we allow ourselves to be in doubt. Because only when you're in doubt can you actually start exploring. And only when you start exploring can you get into the process of self-inquiry and appreciate what you're actually beginning to learn. It takes a lot of courage to do what I'm saying. Leadership is also about not constantly looking at people's motivations. We all get into this trap. Every one of us, I think, get into this trap of every time somebody comes up with something, we have an explanation. We are very quick to say, he's a problem employee, he's always like that. We really don't give ourselves the space. No, we all talk of listening, but in reality we don't listen. We don't even hear most of the time. It's the ability to listen. It's the ability to actually go deeper and resonate with what the man is saying and try to appreciate his perspectives. It's again a lot of courage to do that. Because if we start doing that, that's where a journey to understanding teams will start growing. And it can actually happen. Let's not forget, I would like to add what the Bhagavad Gita so beautifully put across as 3 states of human nature. I've written about that also. It's very nicely said so beautifully. In his own way, Krishna says about how people could be either Rajasic, Tamasic or Sattvic. If I were to tell an Indian audience that the Gita says this and so it must be true, I'm sure a lot of skepticism will be there. But the same thing has been researched now, fortunately or unfortunately, in the backyard of Harvard. And they give a nice scientific, very nice English definition to it, and then they describe it so beautifully. I keep telling the person who described it and wrote about it, saying that you just copied the Gita, which he did not, but he actually did hardcore research for 30 years to write about it. Now, we all begin our lives, whether it's in a company or whether as we are born as children, in a state of what I call the socialized mind. And these are all not my work. I'm borrowing the work of Robert Keegan, an extraordinary educational psychologist, whose life's work is this. It's all about understanding and differentiating the subject and object. The journey of enlightenment and transformation begins with us acquiring that ability to differentiate subject and object. And what do I mean by that? What do I gain by that? It's all about ensuring that we can actually understand reality as it is and not as we want it to be. Many of us want reality to be the way we want it to be. We want it to be that way, so we think we see things that way. But the ability to appreciate reality as it is takes a lot of training, discipline, and vigor. And we all begin life in a very socialized framework where we want to be followers. We love to be following some ideology. Follower doesn't mean just a man. Follower could be a principle, an ideology, a religion, a dogma, anything. we hardly think, we hardly explore, is there value in this? We're just trained to do what we're told and we do it. It's nice to have socialized people in a company, let me tell you that. I'm not even denigrating any state. We all need socialized people, otherwise we'll have no workers at all. They are like the worker ants, the soldier ants. We need people to perform. But as they grow and as they transform themselves, they have to mature into what I call the self-authoring people. The world is driven, whether you like it or not, by self-authoring people. The Arvind Kejriwals and so many other people who are all authoring what they believe is change in their own ways. They're driven by an energy and fire that they have within themselves. They're all highly independent people. If socialized people are dependent, the self-authoring people are extremely independent. The danger comes when you put four self-authoring people together. It can be four horses pulling in four different directions and you might achieve nothing. I'm sure many of you may resonate with problems that you may have in your companies when you try to build teams of four self-authoring people. But the challenge comes, all of us, all entrepreneurs are self-authoring. But if you were to remain just a mere entrepreneur who's self-authoring, I think the challenges of letting go will be something you'll have to confront very soon. Unless you go on and transcend yourself to the next stage of your enlightenment, what I call self-transformational leadership. This is a stage where you're able to appreciate interdependence, you're able to appreciate reciprocity, and you understand that you have to be different things at different points of time. You understand that leadership is very contextual. You might be socialized in one setting, you might be self-authoring in some other setting, you might be transformational in a third setting. This ability to constantly live with yourself in a very mindful way is possibly the highest state of enlightened leadership. Buddhism today talks so much of mindfulness. Well, they may talk about it in a very spiritual sense. There's so much of work the Dalai Lama, surprisingly, has actually tried to do in this field. He's had a set of monks who have started meditating from day one to people who meditate for 30 years, undergo a series of tests. They have been challenged by leadership simulations. And you'll be surprised, people who have meditated the most did the best. And so to me, leadership is about managing yourself, managing others, and managing action. So before I conclude, what do we mean by managing self? Well, there are a lot of things I would like to say. It begins with your body. Most of us ignore it. We really don't believe it's important. It is important. And the simplest thing, well, we have Dr. Javed and so many people here. I don't have to be saying this. They'll be saying this to a lot of people. Is it begins with exercise. The benefits of exercise today is not just for the human body, it's for the human brain. And we need it. It's not only about exercise, it's about the food you eat, the kind of food you eat. And many times we recommend, it's about taking the small breaks, the 3-minute, 4-minute breaks that you take, which we think is not important. We see it as a gossiping in front of the coffee machine. You actually need a break. And what I would only qualify with a break is spend the break with the people you love. That makes a huge difference. Don't spend the break with people who can actually bring in negative energies in you. It is important as you're growing and transcending yourself to apply your body in a way that actually creates the environment for your mind to grow. It's important that we take care of our minds. We actually create sanctuaries for ourselves. You may not be religious, but create space for yourself to just be alone with yourself. It could be a room, it could be a corner, it could be your office, it could be a meditation room, it could be a temple. It doesn't matter. Create that sanctuary, that holy place where you're alone with your own thoughts. I find that in a bus when I travel or in a plane I try to be alone with myself. But we have challenges. When you're traveling with co-passengers who believe that they have to be talkative, you'll have challenges. But create that sanctuary for yourself. Take care of your body, take care of your mind. Most importantly, you've got to begin with your heart. Most of us have forgotten how to respond from our heart. Now, Vivekananda used to say so beautifully. He told his brother disciples and said, whenever you have a conflict in running the Ramakrishna order, ask yourself, how would your response be if it's from your heart? How would your response be if it is from your mind? Well, reason is extraordinary, but it's got its own limitations. It's got the limitations of your experience, knowledge, and learning. But emotion is something which cannot be described. Intuitively, we all know. There's so much that we all do which can't be explained, but it works right. But let me share with you, there's a lot of research which explains how it can be done. There's a lot of research. Actually, this research happened 20, 30 years ago. A person actually got the Nobel Prize for it. He was basically a psychologist, but he got a Nobel Prize in economics because his work was applied in economics. He was a man called Daniel Kahneman, who spoke about thinking slow and thinking fast, and how we think. How do each one of us respond to the events around us? And he describes the system 1 thinking and systems 2 thinking. And when we tacitly and intuitively respond to a particular situation, we look at a person, we know what he is. We say, oh, you ninge. You would have had no interaction with him, but you just can describe him. That is your system 1 brain taking over. But actually you have to start processing when I've been reminded, so I'll close. Adds on, the system too takes over. Enlightened leadership is being mindful of all this, living in a world which is in the present and in the now, recognizing reality as it is, and transcending yourself to reach a world where we can actually make a difference, not just to ourselves, but to the world we live in. I think the time has come, my friends, that we all take on leadership positions in our own small ways and decide that we lead our lives differently. Before I close, I would like to read a quote from a very famous priest. He's a priest actually. Father James Keller is his name. I think this quote is extremely relevant to what I spoke till now and also to India today. To every nation in the world, if you were to watch, unfortunately like I did, some of the presidential debates that happened, it's a sad reflection of the kind of leadership that the world is creating space for. But I would like to quote from James Keller. He says it so beautifully. He says it in the context of a different country, but imagine that he's in India. What this country needs is more people to inspire others with confidence and fewer people to discourage any initiative in the right direction. We are all quick to judge and say, "Adu agalarri, anti-corruption, ಏನ್ರಿ ಉಪಯೋಗ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಗಲಾಟೆ ಮಾಡಿತಾನೆ ಏನು." No, we don't do anything about it. We have no qualms bribing the local policeman in the street corner, but we'll talk about something that is not working in Delhi. But I think if we can just remember what Keller said, what this country needs is more people to inspire others with confidence and fewer people to discourage any initiative in the right direction. More to get into the thick of things, fewer to sit on the sidelines merely finding fault. More to point out what is right with the world and fewer to keep harping on what is wrong with it. And more who are interested in lighting candles and fewer who blow them out. Let's all join hands in lighting candles to build a resurgent India. Thank you.